one of the series, I guess, that we've been doing, this will be the third one, talking about metrics. Okay. And looking at metrics that I think are showing a very optimistic picture of the election that you're not really hearing about on the mainstream media, that, as we've said, just wants a horse race, just wants it to be tied. So all of the things that we've been talking about up till today have been about polls, right? And we've been talking about breaking it down, showing how women are flocking to him and all the different demographic trends. Today, we're going to talk about votes, not poll numbers, but numbers of people who are voting at the polls, and that's the only dependent variable that really counts. So early voting has started in many states. So let's take a look at what the statistics look like. So in Pennsylvania, early votes, 285,000 Democrats have voted, but 95,000 Republicans have voted. In other words, in Pennsylvania, Democrats are outvoting Republicans so far 3-1. Now, they may vote more on election day. We know that's their tradition. But these early signs, I think, are telling us something about people's enthusiasm to vote, their motivation to vote. If you're really, really driven to do something, you do it right away. Let's look in Michigan. Early votes, 305,000 for the Democrats, 185,000 for the Republicans. And finally, let's look at Wisconsin. Democrats, 90,000 votes, Republicans, 41,000. So more than 2-1. And then, of course, among independents, I didn't even read the independents numbers, which is okay. But remember, she's leading by 16 points with independents.
You know, John, this is an instance of the old political axiom, which is if a race is tied, the race will be won by the people with the best ground game. And remember that Trump is outsourcing ground game work to their PACs, whereas Biden had been working for years to build it. And I think we're seeing those enormous numbers because they have teams in all these states getting people to register, getting people to vote early. So I think it's another good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's look, since that slide was taken, another one came out today, a day later. So that than the data that you just saw, 1 day later, let's look at the early voting in Pennsylvania. So now there's a total of 631,000 votes, 100,000 more from the day before. Democrats, 65%.
Wow.
Republicans, 25%. Again, the 3-1 ratio, roughly speaking, is continuing.
Interesting.
Isn't that?
Yes.
Isn't that interesting?
Absolutely. And you're going to talk about Georgia next, aren't you? Which is also extraordinary.
But again, an extraordinary number. Let's look at that slide. So one thing to keep in mind is, and this is a truism about elections, when there's high turnout, Democrats win, period. Because there's more Democrats than there are Republicans. Republicans win because they overvote. They're overrepresented in the electorate compared to a lot of the constituencies in the Democratic Party. What we're seeing here is, here's an update from the Georgia Secretary of State. Update. Georgia voters have surpassed all daily records for any day of early voting in 2022. We've had 234 voters as of 3:30 p.m. Our county election directors are outstanding, and Georgia voters are energized. And the person commenting on the tweet says Georgia voters smashed the old record turnout for the first day of early voting. The old record, according to the Georgia Recorder, was 136,000 first day votes in 2020. In other words, we've doubled the record.
That's remarkable.
We've lapped the record.
If
that many people are voting in Georgia, we will win Georgia. It's that simple.
We're going to find out if it holds, but it certainly looks good.
And lastly, I said I was looking at votes. I'm going to look at one more polling number because I think it's that important. When Biden was running against Trump, there was a 30% advantage for Trump. Actually, I'm sorry, this got cut off, so you can't see the question. I'll have to read the question because it got cut off. The question was, who is more cognitively competent, cognitively fit, to be president? Well, people by 30% thought Trump was more cognitively fit than Biden. This is actually one of the things that got me back into this commentary game. But now look in September, Harris is 20 points above Trump on cognitive fitness to be president. That is a 50, folks, a 50-point swing. Why am I highlighting this particular question other than the big statistical discrepancy? Because as we're going to hear from our guest today, Dr. Drew Weston, who's written, I think, the seminal book about politics that all Democrat strategists need to read, The Political Brain, people make a fundamental voting decision at a very visceral and primitive level. Who is stronger? Who is fit? Who is dominant? Because that will be the person who keeps me safe. Okay. And so the person who is perceived as more fit and dominant wins, whether they're good or bad. As Bill Clinton used to like to say, voters like strong and wrong better than right and weak. And so when it was Trump against Biden, he was strong and wrong, and Biden was right and was perceived as weak. And we were going to lose the election. Okay. Now he's perceived as old and weak and cognitively frail, and she is perceived as strong and dominant and more fit. And so there's one test essentially for president. It is who is more dominant and fit at an unconscious, visceral, simian level. That's how we make the decision. And Dr. Weston will explain this to us when we interview him. But that's why I'm highlighting that particular statistic.